Perfect. There she is. Tom has them. Oranges, right? And you're sharing. This is like the loaves and fishes, right? Okay. Oh, so sorry. All right. At item number 8, we are reconvened at 1:55. Hi, welcome back, and thank you to those of you who've been hanging around all day. We really appreciate it. Hope you found the morning interesting. Hi.
You can start.
Okay. Hey, good morning, Chair Marcus, members of the board. My name is Nick Martirano. I am the Water Quality Assessment Unit Chief in the Division of Water Quality. Today I'm presenting the proposed amendment to the Water Quality Control Policy for developing the Clean Water Act Section 303D list, also known as the listing policy. To my left is Senior Counsel Stacy Gillespie of the Office of Chief Counsel, and to her left is Rick Rasmussen, Chief of the It is on TMDO Section Unit.
You might want to pull it closer to you. It's more comfortable.
Okay, sorry about that. State Board received 24 comment letters. Staff's initial responses were emailed to the pertinent LYRIS lists and posted on January 26, 2015. On January 28, 2015, staff sent through the integrated report LYRIS list minor revisions of the original responses and responded to a comment letter that was found to have been missed during the first round of responses. That comment letter is identified as comment number 24. The revised responses to comments were provided on the program page and are available at the back of the room. So the State Water Board adopted the listing policy in 2004 to comply with California Water Code 13191.3a, which requires the State Water Board to prepare guidelines to be used by the water boards pursuant to Section 303D of the Clean Water Act. In the 10 years since the listing policy was adopted, the State Water Board has implemented several changes related to how the 303 listing process is administered. For example, one major change came with a guidance issued by US EPA to combine the reporting requirements of 303D and 305B of the Clean Water Act. This resulted in the development of the California Water Quality Assessment Database for creation of the California Integrated Report. In addition, the California Environmental Data Exchange Network, also known as CEDEN, was brought over to the State Water Board in 2009 and was designed to not only be a main repository for data for the public to access, but also the main clearinghouse for data to be used for assessment purposes. We have also seen the amount of data steadily increase over time with the implementation of monitoring and reporting requirements. With this increased volume of data, meeting the reporting requirements associated with Clean Water Act Section 303D has become increasingly difficult. The proposed amendments before you today are aimed at making the overall process more efficient and to implement strategies based on lessons learned from the 2006, 2008, 2010 listing cycles, as well as the 2012 cycle. So there are 4 main revisions being proposed to increase the efficiencies of administering the listing policy. The first allows the State Water Board to determine the scope of the data assessed in a given listing cycle. Assessing the entire state and meeting the requirements of the Clean Water Act has proven to be an insurmountable task for water board staff. Other states have faced similar problems and assess different basins within each listing cycle. The proposed amendment will result in the State Water Board determining which regional water boards would have all their readily available data and information included in a given listing cycle. In addition, it allows for regions that are off-cycle to include priority listings and delistings in any given cycle. The second proposal clarifies that the regional water boards are responsible for reviewing all readily and available data and information. It also revises the definition of all readily available data and information to be data that can be uploaded into CEDEN. CEDEN is a public database hosted by the State Water Board that will ensure that data used for 303D listing purposes is of high quality and includes the necessary information for efficient assessments. In addition to providing a standardized data format, the use of CEDEN will allow the data collected to be analyzed and used by many other programs, making the resources spent on collecting and analyzing that data more valuable and widely utilized. The use of CEDEN also aligns with the listing policy's existing requirement under section 6.1.2 that data be submitted in SWAMP format, which the CEDEN data templates are built from. It is important to note that if CEDEN is unable to accept certain types of data or information, that data or information may still be submitted for consideration as long as it comports with the formatting and quality assurance protocols of the listing policy.
Can you just describe what that means?
So CEDEN as a database has some limitations on accepting certain types of data like photographic evidence, continuous monitoring information every 15 minutes. Although they're working on improving that, currently they can't accept that into the database. So in cases where you have that kind of information, you could still submit it as long as it followed the requirements of section 6.1.2 and 6.1.4 of the listing policy, and it was basically outlines the quality assurance requirements and what information has to be included for proper assessment.
So what does that mean?
That means that it has
Just paint me a picture of what that means.
So if it was a picture, it would have to have the date the picture was located, the lat and longe of the location was located, who took it, what the picture was intended to take.
Okay, so information that would help you understand what that picture was
Exactly.
and how it was
It
grounded.
would allow us to properly assess it against an applicable water quality objective.
All right. And then the continuous monitoring, what kind of
That's
things
actually
do you have
being-
to do with that?
It's actually, well, it's just a problem with the database itself being able to upload that every 15-minute temperature monitoring data. I actually did speak with CEDEN program managers yesterday afternoon, and the new SWAMP QA unit is actually working on that right now. 2 of the regional data centers actually can accept it, and they're working on a module to allow that data to be included very soon.
Thank you.
So the third proposed change would allow the State Water Board to administer a region's listing process for any given listing cycle. This change procedurally allows the State Water Board to administer a region's listing process in the event the region is unable to complete the process in a timely manner consistent with the other regions in the current listing cycle. The State Water Board does not foresee the need to utilize this approach, but it is a necessary procedural amendment to allow flexibility to meet submission requirements. The preferred process would be for the regional water board staff to administer the listing process due to regional board staff's knowledge and intimate knowledge about local water bodies and basin plan objectives. The fourth proposal involves allowing the executive director to approve the statewide 303D list. Now, if the executive director did take up approval, the public would still be given an opportunity to provide comments, and we would be given responses. In addition, if the executive director determined that the proposed 303D list was particularly controversial and should be heard by the board, he or she could suggest the matter be agendized for the board's consideration. Furthermore, anytime any state water board member may confer and direct the executive officer to agendize the 303D list be considered at a board at a public meeting.
So that means any one of the 5, right?
Yeah,
So, blah. So any one of the 5 could
correct. They could confer.
talk to the executive director and
Yes.
say, I think there should be a board hearing.
Precisely. So after the listing policy was adopted, the State Water Board adopted by resolution 2008-0070 the Water Quality Control Plan for Enclosed Bays and Estuaries Part 1 Sediment Quality, which contains narrative sediment quality objectives for bays and estuaries to protect aquatic life and human health, as well as guidance to interpret those objectives. Part 1 of the sediment quality objectives, also referred to as SQOs, also provide 3 directives concerning the relationship of the SQO for aquatic life and the listing policy. Furthermore, in resolution number 2008-0070, the State Water Board acknowledged the need to ensure the listing policy be updated to reflect the adopted sediment quality objectives, and the associated methodologies. The proposed listing policy amendment contains revisions at section 6.1.3 and 3.6 to ensure consistency between the listing policy and the sediment quality objectives, as well as the guidance adopted to interpret the objectives and make assessments to develop the 303D section list. So on November 12, 2013, the State Water Board provided electronic notice and a memorandum to persons interested in the California Integrated Report that the State Water Board and US EPA were discussing strategies to make the process for developing the integrated report more efficient and submittals to US EPA more timely. The notice and memo went out to over 2,000 subscribers to the State Water Board Integrated Report LIRIS list. The notice and memo indicated that we would be proposing to divide the state by region for each listing cycle, that a proposed amendment to the listing policy would be drafted and noticed for public comment, and included a link to a letter to US EPA from the State Water Board, Division of Water Quality, dated July 15, 2013. The letter to the US EPA further detailed proposed procedural changes to the listing policy and described the strategy of having the 303D list be comprised of a portion of the 9 regional water boards for each listing cycle, defining all readily available data information as that submitted into CEDEN, and that State Water Board approval will be delegated to the Executive Director. Both documents are also provided on the program page and provide staff contact information if any stakeholders and any comment or questions. State Water Board also conferred and consulted with the regional boards on the proposed amendment and provided notice by newspaper publication in each of the 9 regions. On November 20th, 2014, the State Water Board provided notice to the public that the proposed listing policy amendment was available for public review and written comment. The deadline for the public submission of written comments was December 22nd, 2014. So here are some of the most common comments that we received. Comment number 1, allowing the State Water Board to partition the state by listing cycle does not comply with the requirements of the Clean Water Act, Section 303D, to assess all water bodies of the state every 2 years. So the Clean Water Act, Section 303D 1A, does not explicitly provide that a state is required to provide new listing assessments for all bodies of water within its borders for each listing cycle. Neither does the Clean Water Act require a state to submit such a list to US EPA every 2 years. Since the Water Board adopted the listing policy in 2004, the State Water Board and the 9 regional water boards have been unable to assess within a 2-year cycle the water bodies within all 9 regions. The current process for evaluating all waters within each of the 9 regional boards results in a new 303D list every 6 years or more based on potentially outdated data. The proposed amendment to the listing policy is intended to remedy this issue. The proposed amendment to the listing policy will allow the 2-year listing cycle to include an assessment of a portion of the regional water boards waters to allow for the water boards to approve an updated 303D list coinciding with every even year. Furthermore, other states like Colorado and Minnesota similarly break up their watersheds and report every 2 years on those specific waters. Second comment, the requirement to use CEDEN for data submittal is not appropriate as it will limit the data submitted and will create undue hardship. As previously mentioned, the proposed amendment allows for types of data and information that cannot be submitted into CEDEN due to the constraints of the database, as long as they satisfy the QA requirements of Section 6.1.4 and follows the solicitation requirements in Section 6.1.2, both of which are detailed in the notice of solicitation. Section 6.1.4 is not being proposed for amendment, and in essence requires that data be accompanied by a QAPP if the data is to be used as the primary basis to support a listing or delisting recommendation. Section 6.1.2 requires that data solicited and submitted be in electronic form and use the SWAMP data format. Because CEDEN and the data templates are built off of SWAMP protocols, if data submitters are following the requirements of Section 6.1.2, the submittal of data into CEDEN will be facilitated. These requirements will not be triggered until the next solicitation period, which will likely be for the 2018 listing cycle. So staff also added whereas clause number 8 to the resolution in response to concerns from stakeholders regarding the use of CEDEN. The clause clarifies that that the CEDEN requirements wouldn't be triggered until the next notice of solicitation, which isn't envisioned to occur until the 2018 listing cycle. This would allow stakeholders time to work with CEDEN and the CEDEN program managers. Now, the CEDEN program managers have a workshop scheduled for March 16th to meet with stakeholders and data users to get feedback on the needs of users. Trainings and online tools will also be developed through this ongoing coordination process.
So the answer to the concern is that we're going to work with you to make it easier, and we're not trying to exclude info, we're trying to make it more readily accessible and usable, but basically what we're giving them is a promise that it's going to be worked out before the time comes.
Correct. When we
Right.
when we talked with them following the comment period, it sounded, what we heard was that they were concerned that these requirements were going to happen as soon as the board took action. And so what we were saying is like, well, no, we're going to allow you time. We're not going to implement this as part of the 2014 or 2016 cycles. We're going to wait till 2018, which not only gives us time to better conform CEDEN to their needs, but also allows them time to become comfortable with the use of CEDEN and meet with CEDEN staff and get trainings as necessary.
So I like what I just heard you say, which is it's not just training them up on CEDEN, it's making CEDEN be able to accept, because you would think by 2018 you'd find an easier way to bring in photographs, and you're going to need to have
Right.
that kind of grounding you're talking about for it to be useful anyway. So it's sort of a two-way project.
It is indeed, and yeah, we've been meeting quite often with the CEDEN program managers, and they're almost rebuilding the system. The bones are still there, but they're trying to make it much more user-friendly and much more adaptable, as well as being able to coordinate with bringing in data from CWIX and from SMARTS and eventually WQX, as well as the module that I just spoke of regarding continuous monitoring data. It's envisioned that photographs will also be allowed to be incorporated. So it gives us time to improve the database itself while also allowing stakeholders to become more familiar.
Right, so ultimately they would get the benefit of that would be that the data is more usable for them too. They
Correct.
Have access to all the other data from these.
That's correct.
I'm just trying to set the stage for understanding what this move is and the timing. Did you want to ask a question?
Will people be able, if they have data that is CEDEN compatible, will they be able to do it in the 2016 and 2014, 2016? Or no, I guess not 14, but 16.
Currently, we're just utilizing data that we have collected as part of the 2012 solicitation because we had such a large amount of data. We've been trying to wrap our arms around that while working on improving the listing policy to allow for some more successful implementation. So our direction now is to not solicit data until the 2018 listing cycle, which would allow us to not only catch up with the data we currently have, but also allow us to implement some of these strategies that we're posing today, as well as improve the databases that we're using.
All right, that's one other question, just so I understand the context and I'm projecting concerns.
Sure.
So if I think back to when I was an activist trying to protect a given water body, what I would want to be able to do is give the regional board any data I could come up with to add to whatever they were coming up with themselves to make the case. Again, maybe they didn't have the resources, it may be that they didn't care, it may be something else. And I was collecting something that I thought was of value. I would just want them to be able to take that into account. And I understand you need QA, QC on certain things that you need to. So in the short run, if someone has a bunch of data, somebody does look at it to see if they can take it in, right? Now.
So let me jump in here, because we have now gone through this process a number of times, and what we found is that it is not useful to get a box of data that hasn't had any QA/QC, hasn't had any, isn't organized in any way, doesn't fit into our data systems. We did that for a couple of times, which is one of the reasons why our listing cycle
It's so slow.
is so slow. I will give you a little bit of a, anecdotal. When I was running this process in LA, we got boxes of reports that had data in them as submittals. So anything that had data in it, people would photocopy and send it to us. Figuring out, could we use that, and did we already have it from some other source, was very, very difficult. And so we started the process of trying to figure out a more organized way of getting the data into the system. And the approach that staff proposing is to use what we end up putting all that data into in the end, which is a unified data system. And staff is committed to making it easier for folks to do that in the interim. But they already have regional data centers that we paid for and developed to help get data into the system. It's not like we have been hiding this in the past or that it's been a difficult task. There's some things that are difficult to get in. I agree. Data systems are hard to work with sometimes. But we actually did develop this whole scheme to help people get data in.
And the goal, I'm just trying to get the narrative. So the goal is to streamline the system enough that we can move more quickly with the relevant data, but also give information to those who would give us data about what would be most useful. And I can see that your example is very helpful to me, that giving me a box of papers where there's data buried in it is not the most efficient way to help make a point. I can also see a box of photographs without knowing where they're taken, who took them, and where. That wouldn't be useful. So what you're trying to do is just have some parameters that allow the data to be more readily useful, not to exclude data that could be useful.
That's correct. And we also have an ulterior motive of trying to get the data available to people. If we have it in a data system that we can use and that they can use, then it's available. Going back to anecdotal again, when I ran the system, we had a in-house access database that was fed by Excel spreadsheets. Nobody had access to that information except the listing person that looked at it. That's not very useful for any other purpose than to develop the list.
Okay.
Yeah, isn't it true, John, that we've invested over the years into trying to encourage volunteer monitoring to feed into this process through development of such things as the Clean Water Team, to try to assist interested citizens in providing monitoring data for these decisions?
That's correct.
And one thing I'd like to point out, that this is an evolutionary step, not a radical step. The listing policy, when it was adopted originally, did take the first step of saying, we're requiring data to come to us in electronic format. That is already an existing requirement, and the existing requirement to do swamp QA. So currently, we did have to screen data and look at it and say, as John said, the data that comes to us in PDF spreadsheets, we just cannot handle. We get so much data that they're not complying with the policy already. So now we're taking the next evolutionary step and say, okay, now here's a database that complies with all the things that the policy already requires you to do and is a two-way street, as John said. So it's not like it's a giant leap. It's I would classify it more as an evolutionary step in the process as we've learned.
All right, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just
no.
find the issues that I've read, it's easier to have you
I-
you all explain versus waiting for people to raise them and then
I
answer.
appreciate that. Yeah,
I'm just
and in
trying to
building off
understand.
Board Member Moore's question, the CEDEN managers are working directly with Eric Burris of the Citizen Monitoring Coordinator to help build those online tools, and he's done in the past some really good online trainings for how to collect citizen monitoring for swamp, and so he's going to build off that to make it applicable to CEDEN. So we're not trying to eliminate data, we're just trying to make the data not only more usable, but also in a standardized format for efficient assessment. The State Water Board should not be given the authority to administer the listing process for a regional water board. So as I described earlier, the preferred process to have the regional water boards administer their own listing process due to the regional board staff's unique knowledge of local water bodies. However, staff views this as a necessary procedural change that would provide an avenue for statewide 303D list to move forward in the event a regional water board was failing to act consistent with the other regions on cycle. This was kind of an outgrowth of some past experiences where a couple of regional boards were holding up the entire process. And the way Section 6.2 now is worded is we had no choice but to wait for all the regional water boards to be completed. So this allows us an avenue to take up that process for them and to allow the process to continue moving forward.
You know, that's kind of like the time, I'm just looking at Fran because she volunteered all of her time and our time when we've taken stuff on for regional boards when it was more than they could handle.
Correct.
For a variety of reasons.
So the executive director should not be given the authority to approve the statewide 303D list. So again, as previously mentioned, the amendment allows for either the state water board or the executive director to take approval action on the statewide 303D list. Both processes allow for public participation, and at any point, the executive director can recommend the 303D list be agendized for a future board meeting, or any state water board member may confer and direct the executive director to bring approval before the board. So the last comment, more information should be included throughout the listing policy regarding the inclusion, application, and implementation of the SQOs. So the listing policy provides a selection process on what guidance to use to interpret narrative water quality objectives. So when the State Water Board adopted the SQOs, it also adopted the interpretive guidance for 303D listing purposes. Staff did not find that the proposed amendment to section 6.13 of the listing policy fully addressed the provisions adopted within the SQOs to develop the 303D list. Consequently, we added additional language and incorporated as part of change sheet number 1, which was circulated on January 30th, 2015. So this addition clarifies that any provisions adopted within the sediment quality objectives to develop the 303D list should also be taken into account when implementing the current and any future sediment quality objectives. Staff, in fact, further clarified the relationship of any adopted sediment quality objective and the listing policy via change sheet number 2, which was circulated yesterday, and provided additional language to section 3.6 of the proposed amendment. Unfortunately, this presentation was produced before change sheet number 2 was circulated, but the language is provided in the back of the room and was circulated to you all. To change sheet number 1 also addressed the definition of all readily and available data information. The following changes highlighted in yellow were added to make it clear that the regional water boards review all readily available data information submitted. In addition, staff added language to clarify that all readily available data information should be submitted into CEDEN or any successor database as directed in the notice of solicitation. This is kind of to allow us some leeway if there's been talks of changing the names. So that's what that was added for. And consistent with the previous slide, this addition clarifies that the notice of solicitation will identify the database in which data information shall be submitted. With that, staff recommends approval of the proposed amendment to the listing policy with change sheets 1 and 2. And with that, we can field any questions.
Great. Questions before we go to comments? Well, let's listen to the comments and we'll have a conversation as we go through. We have a number of speakers who've asked for a variety of times, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. I'm going to say 5 minutes, and if you can do it in 2 or 3, only I will know whether you met your own time limit. But anticipate that, and I know all of you pretty much, so we'll just see how well you did. First, we have Janet Hashimoto, manager of the Water Quality Assessment Section for U.S. EPA. Thank you, Ms. Hashimoto. Thank you for coming and spending all day, and it's very nice to see you again.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, board members and board staff. My name is Janet Hashimoto. I manage the Water Quality Assessment Section of Water Division at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency in San Francisco. And EPA did not make formal comments during your comment period on your listing policy because this is one part of the 303D list process that we do not review and approve. We only review and approve your list. But as far as your listing policy, so I'm here to just make a statement about what we've seen as your changes. We do support the regional boards, the state board's efforts for this process because we hope that by adopting these new listing policy that you'll have more timely submittals of the California 303D list of impaired waters. And as many of you know, for several list cycles, it's been very, very difficult for the state board to meet our regulation requirement of submittal every 2 years in April of even-numbered years. And then one of the other things that happen is then you're also combining list cycles. So we saw that in 2010, 2012, and now this time around, in your March board hearing, you'll be reviewing and approving the 2012-2014 list. And as you know, we're already in 2015. So we're kind of concerned about the lagging time period and never getting 303D list updates. So, and the reason is obviously because in a state like California, it's a very large state, and with also, you're a victim of your enhancement to your monitoring program. Even swamp data and CRAM for your wetlands, you just have over the years, and this is great that you have, even within your state board process, you've enhanced the information gathering. So that's kudos to you, but that means that you now have a sheer volume of data that you have to review, process, and in some way get it into a system that you can manage and make the actual assessments. And that being said, then now you have multiple objectives or water quality standards all over the place. You have regionally specific basin plans, you've got your ocean plan, you have your inland surface waters and basin estuaries plan, and you have to assess it against those standards and as well as any other policies that and guidances that you have for making water quality assessments. So it's a really, really difficult job. And just to give you an example of something that we've been doing, and Felicia, you may have been our regional administrator when our Barnum case started.
This isn't the first time you've explained this sort of thing to me, so I'm having
Okay.
I'm having a moment here.
Anyway, we got sued by Barnum, and it had to do with the listing of Redwood Creek for impairments. And that case has been lingering for many, many years, and most recently we had settled, and what they wanted was just for EPA to review the volume of data that they submitted for consideration of a delisting or that it's really not impaired. That, just one water body alone, it's taken us 6 months to review their data dump of what was submitted to both the regional board and the state board for your consideration. And that none of that came in any format that we could really truly assess the data. It was truly just boxes of basically data that they scanned for us. And so it was really, really difficult. So that just gives you an example of just one water body and the significant amount of time it's taking us to review that. So it's difficult. But as a practical matter, this is one of the reasons that when we met, Tom and his managers meet with us periodically and every other month, and we go over some of these kinds of issues that we're having. And the suggestion or the recommendation came that perhaps if they parsed out different regional boards and assessed them on a rotating cycle, would that work? And I said, as a practical matter, that would hopefully get us more timely submissions. So we think that that would be a great way to adapt your listing because it takes a lot of time. And so we accepted and allowed for these, what we call the rotating basin concept, and for assessments or monitoring or any kind of process to sequence this in a spatially and temporally focused manner. And that actually, that kind of consideration was actually put into our 2009 listing guidance that we came up with. So we allowed for that, and many states, including Florida, Tennessee, and I believe Washington does it a little bit differently. It's not geographically rotating, it's more by water body types. So other states are doing this as well. And included with that 2009 guidance, if you're going to take the rotating basin, we also had other suggested elements. And I think the State Board has considered some of those other recommended elements. And one of them is addressing the preferred format for submitting data and information. And of course, you're requiring CEDEN, or the California Environmental Data Exchange Network. And also, you know, as Nick explained, if you can't enter data into CEDEN, then some other alternative, if it meets your QA requirements, is acceptable. And I think that that seems reasonable. So we think that that is a reasonable request to data submitters. And I can't say that I myself have submitted anything into CEDEN, but looking at the process, it's really not that cumbersome right now. I would be very concerned if you make it more and more onerous. But in its present form, I think it's pretty doable for anybody who is really collecting data. If they're collecting data, they should be savvy enough to be able to use a data system that would allow for a better assessment of all that information that they're collecting. So we think it's actually quite reasonable request. Another element that you've included is when you have assessments done off-cycle. So let's say that in this round, you're not a particular regional board, it's not their focus time for it. I believe your process allows for regional boards that are off-cycle to submit information as long as it goes through the public process. So you allow for that. So therefore, you know, generally we think that the revisions that you're making are acceptable, and we think that it'll streamline the process. So we're really, really looking forward for you progressing through this, and look forward to your submission shortly after your March board hearing. Thank you.
Very much. It's helpful. Very helpful. Next we have Tim Stroshane, Restore the Delta. Welcome back. And Mitchell, followed by Mitchell, Ms. Thank you. From CASA. Thank you. Oh, Tim left. He was here earlier today. We'll save it and see if he comes back. Okay. Mitchell. That's it. I'll have to get that. And followed by Sarah Amendzadeh.
Chair Marcus, members of the board, I'm Mitchell
Thank you also
Mishlevietz.
for being here this morning.
Just before your break, yes. Yeah. I'm employed at Larry Walker Associates as an environmental engineer, but I also serve as the co-chair for the CASA Regulatory Work Group Water Committee, and that is who I'm representing today. Thank you for allowing us to comment on the proposed amendment changes. We wrote a letter. It had 5 or 6, however you count comments, and all but one were addressed to our satisfaction. Thank you. Especially the idea of making the data easily transferable between submittals and the CEDEN database, and the idea of some data aren't easily put into the CEDEN, and you're change the wording to allow that data to be submitted. Thank you. The one that we still have a comment on is the idea of the executive director being able to approve the list without a full board hearing. The idea there is that, you know, some of the checks and balances, it feels to us, that are being removed from the process, and we're concerned that somehow it's going to allow, the streamlining is going to allow or prevent us from being able to comment and present our case as needed. One situation where that might occur is that part of the policy allows the state board to take over the listing policy from a regional board who might be dragging their feet, say. In that instance, there wouldn't be that first chance to comment on the listing policy. It would go right to the state board, and then the executive director could then approve. And I understand that there are checks and balances in the system, how it's set up, but it feels to me that we are losing a bit of the checks and balances in that situation. But thank you for addressing all the other comments and working with us in that respect.
No, happy to. John or Tom or anyone want to comment on the process point?
Especially that scenario where the first bite at the apple would come to the state board, which I'm not sure if that's even possible, but could you comment on that, the due process?
Stacy, thank you.
Yeah,
I'm happy to
Stacy.
step in here. Thank
Stacy
you.
would help you. Thank you.
The first comment regarding the delegation to the executive director taking away a full hearing process at the State Water Board, it's really important to realize that under the current policy, there is no
Right.
full hearing that occurs at the state board level.
That's what I thought.
So under the current process, the hearing happens at the regional board level, has the written comment, written response requirements, and the participation that's typically done with a hearing. And then what happens for the state board approval is really